Hello and welcome in once again. I am John Kurtz, joined by Cole Manbeck today. We do not have Derek Young on the pod, but that is okay because we have K-State Athletic Director Gene Taylor with us. Very happy to welcome him on to the pod for the first time. So, Gene, thank you very much for joining us here. I know it's been a really busy and hectic time for you. You were hanging out down around the Final Four. But right before that, you hired a men's basketball coach, and coaching searches are obviously very crazy. And hey, we've got some Bob Bowlsby news to talk about, too, as well, as we just found out that he'll be stepping away as Big 12 commissioner here within the next 90 days. But let's start back kind of reverse chronological order with the hiring of Jerome Tang as K-State's new men's basketball coach. Just take me through what the coaching search was like. It always seems very hectic from a fan's point of view or a pseudo-media point of view, but from the athletic director's point of view, what was that journey like hiring Jerome Tang as the head coach?
Well, thanks for having me on. Appreciate you guys having me on. You know, it can be crazy. It got a little crazier as more and more jobs opened up around the times that we were, ours opened up, and you get nervous that his name gets mentioned for some other jobs out there. And in today's world with agents and their involvement with the search process, constantly staying in touch with their agent. Jerome being an assistant, we had an opportunity to probably have more contact with him directly, just because he wasn't too worried about being a sitting head coach. And usually that's where the agents come in and try to protect those guys that are current head coaches, just because they don't want to get in trouble with their current institution. So, but we were able to, between his agent and our search firm, stay pretty much in contact with all of our candidates that we wanted to talk to. But and then all of a sudden they're in the tournament, right? And so most of the candidates were in the tournament. So being able to get to them, knowing that somebody was getting to, no matter who it was. And then we had a couple of guys that we were interested in that, weren't interested in talking to us. So, you kind of going up and down your list of priority coaches. And once they lost, and we had a chance to visit with him the second time. Obviously, the first time we visited was there in Kansas City, and he really impressed us there. But as I've said before, he kind of set the bar. And every time we talked to somebody, they were all really good. They never really, exceeded the bar, and so that's why I went back to him, there in Waco the Sunday after they lost. So. But it gets a little nerve-wracking there, kind of depending on when jobs are open and their availability.
What was the moment that you knew Jerome Tang was the guy?
Well, like I said, we were pretty impressed with him out of the gate. And then when we got to his house, and he really walked through his offensive philosophy and defensive philosophy, and he put up some video and just his passion, how he explained things. That was one of our big questions is, Jerome, you're kind of touted as a defensive guy. Are you going to create a staff to help you offensively? And he, walked us through that he, coaches a team in the summer that, he's the main offensive coach. And that's what he put up on the board first was, kind of what they do offensively and what he believes in offensively and how he explained it. So, he's probably going to have somebody, and he said, I'll have a staff that, that areas that I'm not strong in, I'll make sure I bring somebody that is as strong in those areas. He's kind of described himself as, I'm kind of the taskmaster, the guy that's going to give you an answer you may not like, but it's going to be, the honest answer. I may need to have somebody on my staff that's going to, pat him on the back and love him up a little bit. So I think he's well aware of what it takes to build a new staff. So his just presence during that, what turned out to be a 3-hour interview, it just kept continuing to drive the thought for me is this was our guy.
I wanted to expand on that actually a little bit, Gene. I had heard Coach Tang mention to Wyatt right after his press conference that he thought one of your questions would be about his offensive capability as a coach, right? Because at Baylor, he's known as a defensive guy. That's what Coach Drew wanted him to do. And he mentioned that he brought up some film with you to show you that. I mean, did that just blow you away that he kind of knew what you would want to hit on and he was preemptively ahead of the game there and was ready to answer those questions?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think part of it is as we sit around and, our search firm is there with us at all of our interviews. We did a lot on Zoom. As the candidate leaves or the candidate gets off the Zoom interview, we'll sit down with Chad and say, okay, he'll say, what did you like? What didn't you like? All those things. What do they need to work on? What do they need to be prepared for? Particularly in a 1-hour interview. When we were first trying to reach out to some of these guys, they don't really have a chance to. And like I said, he was playing the night before. He came to our hotel room, so it was really more of a get to know you kind of interview, and knowing we were going to take a next step with some of them. And we were prepared to take a next step with 2 or 3 if we needed to. And so in that process, we sit down with Chad and say, Chad, here's some things we're concerned about. He needs to be prepared to answer this. We thought he could have gone in a little bit more detail on this. Again, it was a 1-hour deal. So he gets that from his agent. And then if he hadn't been prepared like that, we'd have probably had a question mark, right? Because we did come and give him that heads up. And that's literally how he started off and he said, I know you guys are concerned about where I might be offensively. Let me explain. And so he that just continued to add to the impression we had of him by he was being so prepared for the second round of interviews.
Regarding his staff, does he give you a list of names of potential candidates, like kind of a pool that he might pick from in the planning process and give you a list that he might hire and outline maybe the money that he might need to hire those pool of assistants? And was that any sort of an issue?
No, it really wasn't. And so, yeah, he does. And he had, probably a half a dozen guys that, particularly, again, for a guy like Jerome that hadn't been a head coach, his assistants, they sit around and say, hey, if I ever get a job, you're a guy I'd really like to bring with me. Here's why. And then we ask him what were their strong suits? What are they going to bring to the table? And a couple of them, obviously were very impressive based on what they've done in the past. One of them, a couple of them he didn't get, but the ones he did get, were on his list. Explain why he was bringing them. And then we just talked, I had a pool of money in mind, what I thought was be appropriate. He was fine with that pool and felt he could work within it and still get everybody he needed. So none of that was a major issue.
Well, I know we've already heard about Jerome, Uric, and Marco that are going to be on his staff. Do you have an idea of when that staff is going to be wrapped up and finalized for him?
It should be soon. I think now it's just kind of a paperwork, making sure. I think all 3 of those guys should be done because we were waiting for some background checks. Those all came through fine. They've all been approved by the board or our KSA board. So I think now it's just a matter of getting their contract signed and getting that paperwork to them.
Well, I don't know if this is a question you asked directly, and maybe it is. I guess you can tell me in the interview process with Coach Tang. But the one thing, I think there's obviously a lot of excitement here. There's a ton of track record for this guy as a recruiter. You can't find anybody that'll say a bad thing about him as a man. But he is a first-time head coach, right? And that is the part of this hire that to some would seem a little bit risky. What is, I guess, your answer for those that would have concerns about a first-time head coach at the Division I collegiate level here? And what was his answer if you did ask him about that to kind of assuage your concerns about it?
Yeah, we did. I think the way it was posed was, okay, Jerome, kind of like you just said, we've heard a lot of really good things about you. One of my concerns is that transition from being a head coach or from an assistant coach to being a head coach and all the things that surround that. And I gave him a story of a coach that I hired at North Dakota State that had been a long-time assistant. And I said, it was about 2 months into his job that he came into my office and was very frustrated. And he said, it was a baseball coach. He goes, I just want to coach baseball. That's all I want to do. And I said, guess what? You don't get to do that now. You're the head coach. You have to deal with administrators. You have to deal with budgets. You have to deal with recruiting. You have to deal with parents. I said, baseball coaching will be one of the last things you'll do, except when you get in the season. And I shared that story with him, and he talked a lot about all that he's learned, from Scott, and that Scott had given him a lot of the administrative duties, and he did everything from budgets to, talking to donors to, now granted he was still heavily involved in the game planning, which he still would be, but he felt, he was very prepared for that role, being that he's been with Scott for so long, and Scott has given him so many good duties outside of exit and Owen, as we say. And that was one of the questions I asked his AD. Again, a conversation you can have. sometimes you don't get to have when you're talking to a head coach because you don't want to cross that line, or they don't want you to. But because I know Mac, I was able to call Mac and say, okay, Mac, what are your concerns? He had none. And he said, Gene, you're just, one of the things you're going to have to support him with is making sure that he has everything necessary so he can still coach, make the transition, and you help him with maybe not taking him all over the country for the first few months. Let him get settled in, let him get focused on his team and his coaches, and then, begin to take him out around and do your donor stuff. And that's kind of what we're trying to do right now.
Gene, I don't think it's any secret the Kansas State fan base has been a little bit fractured when it comes to basketball the last few years. How gratifying was it to see the fan base so unified after you made the announcement, after the press conference, social media? I mean, I don't recall seeing Kansas State fans so unified in a long, long time, and I'm sure that had to feel good and make you appreciate the hire even more.
Well, I'm really happy for Jerome and his family. You make a move like that. He was so comfortable at Baylor and his relationship with Scott, and the type of institution that he'd been working at, he was really invested in. And the people that I talked to that I know from Baylor, really sorry to see him go. So for him to make that decision, and he said, there were a lot of jobs that, not a lot. He said there'd been a few jobs that he'd been approached about, even some in this year's cycle, that he just wasn't interested in. So for him to make the move and be accepted as widely as he was, I felt really good about him. And I felt good about our fan base. They could get energized. They, whether it turns into more ticket sales or not, hopefully it will. That'll a lot be dependent upon, where he is on the winning side of things once he gets going. But I felt really good about him. I felt happy for our fan base that they could get behind, him and be energized towards our program again.
One more question in regards to the overall coaching search. You mentioned a couple guys maybe weren't interested in talking to you, but I'm sure you also had coaches and agents that outreach to you guys expressing interest. But I'm curious, how do you tell how do you gauge or determine if a coach is genuinely interested in the job, or if they're trying to use the job opening as leverage to get a new contract at their existing institution?
Yeah, I think the ones we talked to were legitimately interested because they weren't at Power 5 jobs currently. There were those that, we certainly reached out to that, I think they were mature enough to know that the job was important, that they, whether we had a deep conversation with them or not, it really wasn't about leverage. It was really about coming to K-State. But once you get into the conversation, you can kind of tell if they're really invested in you. And part of it is, have they done their homework? Hey, we're going to call you on next day. We've got about an hour, and in that hour, you can pretty much have a pretty clear indication how much they know and how much time they spent on your program. There were a couple that were very impressive, that knew who we were, knew a lot about our current team, knew a lot about who we were at K-State, yada, yada. There was a couple that were kind of faking it, and you just kind of wondered, were they really that interested in us, or was it more about, hey, I get a chance to interview for a Power 5 school?
Gene, with the situation the roster's in right now, obviously a number of players have transferred. That's one, pretty common in college basketball anyway right now, and two, especially after a coaching search. I mean, LSU has an entire roster, for instance, in the transfer portal right now. But Nigel Pack leaves. You have basically like 3 players left on the roster right now. What are expectations? What are reasonable expectations for Coach Tang when that is the situation and he's going to have to go find virtually a completely new roster to go out there next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, certainly something that we anticipated, probably more players than I thought. To be honest with you, I didn't think it would be this many. But, again, I think he has had a chance to evaluate some of the guys we had on the team and let them know kind of what his coaching style was like. So I think there were some that, agreed that his opinion was probably they weren't going to maybe play a lot for us, and others that said maybe I just don't really want to play with this, style of play or coach, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I think it all depends, look what, I won't say, like Iowa State, they, had a great run in the tournament, right? After a year of a rough year. I hope we don't have because I know he had a really rough year his first year. And then, of course, they were able to fill some roster spots. But, I think Jerome, when I've talked to him multiple times, that he feels really confident that he's going to be able to put together not only young kids that'll come in here and be here for a while, with some veterans. And he says, we're going to get dudes. So I believe him, and we'll see. But I know it'll be tough because the way the transfer portal is, it does make it a lot easier for some of these kids to transfer. And we are there. And I'm sure, I know that's what he's been working on pretty much every day, is trying to find kids. And there's a lot out there, right? I mean, there's a lot of kids that are good in the transfer portal.
How fair of a shot did you think he got to really sell himself to Nigel Pack before Nigel decided to enter the portal?
I don't know. I mean, I know that I had talked to Nigel's dad a couple of times, and I know that that he spoke with Nigel when he got here, and I think he was at a couple of workouts, but it seemed a little quicker than I thought it was going to happen. I thought Nigel would hang in there a little bit till he got through the NBA stuff, but Nigel's a great kid and a great player for us, and we hate to see him go, but I get it. He's trying to make a career out of this business, and he thinks he's certainly capable, and I think he is. But I think we would have been able to help him. But I wish him the best because he's a great, great young man. And but I was kind of hoping the coach could spend a little more time with him to convince him to stick around.
Gene, I want to shift gears a little bit off of basketball and talk more name, image, and likeness, which is obviously a big topic nowadays. Aaron Lockett and his agency on Friday announced a new NIL collective for Kansas State. Can you maybe elaborate on the significance of that announcement and what NIL what that'll mean? And does K-State have any involvement in that, or is it all independently done? I'm just curious.
Well, it's a little bit of both. We can't really do much to promote them, or really help them create the model. He's got to create the model. What Aaron's been really good at is asking our compliance staff and asking our Ahern Fund staff, Josh McCown and his crew. He doesn't want to get in the way of the current donors we have, yet he knows he may need some of those donors to participate in the NIL. We even had Aaron on a panel in front of our donors, long before he even, I think maybe he had this thought in his mind, but long before he done any real work on it. But he's been very good about asking us what could he and could he not do with it, so it's not become an inducement, but yet certainly something that we can say, or he could reach out to athletes and say, hey, we've got an opportunity. And so that's really all we can do. Is if a player recruit or a player were to ask, hey, how do I get NIL opportunities? We'll say, well, there's the Wildcats Den. How do I get in hold of them? Well, you're just going to have to go out, and we can't hand them a number and say, here, call this person. So we're limited in what we can do, but we can certainly guide them. If they have any questions about a particular athlete, we can guide them as to what they can and can't do with that athlete. So we appreciate him putting it together. He's probably the one that's been the most organized in his efforts. And I believe he's got, some fairly significant opportunities in terms of total dollars available to the athletes. And we'll see how it goes.
I was going to ask you, have you had many donors or businesses come to you and the athletic department and ask how can they get involved, how can they help, and really wanting to step forward when it comes to this?
Yeah, we have. I would probably say myself, probably half a dozen. And some want to do it just individually and want to know how to do it individually. Others want to either be a part of a collective or considering starting a collective. And we just kind of guide them. I keep telling them we need both. We need both donors to still continue to give to K-State because we need the operational dollars and we need the scholarship dollars. But we're also going to need opportunities for athletes to say, hey, yeah, we've got athletes with name, image, and likeness opportunities. And we've been able to promote that promote it. But, when a recruit comes in, we can say, well, yeah, Nigel Pack had these dollars. Yoki Lee had these dollars. Skylar Thompson had them. So we already had some natural ones of companies reaching out to these guys individually. And so I think that'll just continue to get a little bit better.
Do you know, this is just off the top of my head here, quick question, but do you know what the top dollar amount was for an athlete at K-State so far?
I think Yogi might be one of the top ones right now. Nigel was up there. Deuce, I'm sure, will continue to get more, but I think Yoki just signed one with Degree, which was a national group. So she may be one of our top ones. I don't know the total dollar amount, but she's probably pretty far up there. I don't know that she's yet to six figures, but she's probably not far from it.
How competitive do you feel like in general K-State can be on a national scale when you're trying to recruit kids now, whether it's through the portal or just the traditional high school recruiting as far as NIL goes? Like, do you feel like you guys are pretty caught up with the Joneses as much as you can be in that department?
Well, I mean, I to a point, right? I mean, some of these schools are throwing money around that, first of all, I'm not sure it's 100% legal. But some of these dollar amounts are just ridiculous. I wouldn't say we're seven figures where we're going to be offering a kid seven figures, but I think what we can offer a kid, because we're Kansas State, is some exposure like a Yoki that comes in and like sets the world on fire. That not only do they get local folks involved, they're going to maybe get some national opportunities because it is K-State. And, you're a big deal if you're a Skylar Thompson or a Deuce Vaughn, or if you go to LA, you may not be that big of a deal unless you're one of a couple of players. So I think we can be very competitive. I think I say all the time, a school still only has 85 scholarships, right? Football and 13 in basketball. So, we may not win a kid that goes to Alabama, but we're still going to we need to get kids that are considering Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and we can do that, I think, with our name, image, and likeness opportunities, because the Alabama kid is probably still going to go to Alabama. That's just his name, image, and likeness may be 100,000, where ours might be 50,000.
Well, transitioning a little bit here to the Big 12 at large, I was a bit surprised to see the news yesterday about Bob Bowlsby announcing that he is going to step down before the end of the year, and it sounds like the Big 12 would like to have a new commissioner in within the next 90 days. How long had you known that this was coming down the pipe, that Bob would be stepping away?
About 24 hours. I was at the Final Four. I had actually just seen Bob, and we were going to try to get together for a beverage. And then my president called and said, "Hey, the news is coming out tomorrow. Just wanted to give you the heads up." And I wasn't so sure that Bob wasn't trying to maybe give me a heads up, but there were a bunch of people around me when they ran into him. So, I didn't see it coming. I had heard – that about a couple of years ago he was talking about, and I saw his presser or his press conference or something, said he, been looking for an off ramp here for a couple of years. I thought, he was worn pretty thin during the whole conference transition, a couple of days, but I think he recovered very well, in my opinion. But I don't know. I just think maybe some frustrations of, the expansion or the lack of expansion in the college football playoff. Maybe just said, what, if it works for the Big 12, and, he's done a lot of the homework already and a lot of the legwork to get us where we are. And maybe it's time. I haven't talked to him yet. I reached out to him via text, but we'll see him a couple of times. We've got a few more meetings the next 30 days. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with him as long as we can. Bob's a tremendous person. I've been a big fan of his, and just really wish him the best. And I'm sure he'll land somewhere, probably making some money being a consultant for somebody.
Yeah. What are you guys most looking for in the replacement for him? Do you feel like?
I don't know what the president's, obviously that's a presidential decision. I think that we need somebody that understands the Big 12. I prefer personally a person that's currently in college athletics, either a sitting AD like the ACC did. I'm a little concerned that somebody coming from outside college athletics, particularly that's been sitting in the business, either as a commissioner or an AD, that I'll be honest, a couple of the new commissioners, I'm not so sure it's going to take them a while to get caught up in everything. And yet, Bob had so much experience, right? He'd been an AD at Iowa, been an AD at Stanford. And I thought he brought to the table, what Greg Sankey brings to the table, and, Jim Delaney and those guys. I think we need that kind of background to fill Bob's role.
We can certainly understand that. Gene, really appreciate you taking the time in joining us here. Thanks for all your insight. I know hopefully it'll slow down for you a little bit as we stretch into summer. But thanks for coming on the podcast here, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.